So at the end of my previous video, I mentioned that I'd be doing a weekly series in Assetto Corsa Competizione, just a banter racing series that's just a bunch of lads hanging out and racing, and that's done with Lawrence de Soswa's YouTube community. And I'll be streaming round 2, which is at Brands Hatch, either on YouTube or on Twitch. I'm not sure yet. Now, being a sort of amateur esport dude, GT3s at Spa or GT3 at the Nordschleife are pretty much the only online competition you're going to get with any like large grids. You're not going to get anything at Silverstone because it's too flat, it's too boring. People avoid Monza because they're just going to get killed at turn 1 by some arsehole who thinks he's Senna. And in iRacing, it's the GT3 series that have the biggest participation sign-ups, if you want to call them that, the biggest amount of... Yeah, you know, even in things like IMSA, well, there'll be way more GT3s over prototypes or even GTEs. Oh, and this series I'm in, it ends with a 90-minute double points round at, you guessed it, Laguna Seca. No, it isn't, it's a fucking Spa. But anyway, all of this got me thinking, how the hell did this series become so popular? There's probably a story somewhere, and you'd be right, there is. In the 90s and into the early 2000s, there was a series called GT1, and if you've ever played the old GTR games back in the day, you'll already have a passing familiarity with that series, and even today, those cars are given a mythical status, even though the series died less than 25 years ago. Now, GT1 was created to try and plug that massive gap left by Group C in 1992, which left the World Sports Car Championship, which is now the World Endurance Championship, on its arse. So enter 3 men, called Jurgen Barth, Patrick Peter and Stefan Rattel, and they devised a championship for privateer teams that had 4-hour-long races, and each of the cars was classed from GT1 down to GT4 based off how the car was built in the technical regulations. The first season was in 1994, but by 1996 the manufacturers and the professional teams had got involved, and inevitably, costs went up. Porsche attracted the ire of virtually everybody in the paddock when they turned up with a car that was basically a 962 with a 993 front end, and they built a single road legal car to meet the homologation requirements. That might sound familiar to you because, well, I've already covered that kind of thing, you know, Le Mans, Dower, the Rule Dodge, the homologation that happened there just a few weeks ago. By 1997, the organisation overseeing the whole thing was renamed SRO, which might get you into more familiar territory, as this is the group that organises the 3 series you can select from in Assetto Corsa Competizione. Now, the FIA had also got involved at this point, which allowed for the series to expand from the point of view of the manufacturers, and now GT1, which was the top class of this Grand Tourer series, became exclusively for the professionals. This then saw the entry of cars like the Mercedes CLK GTR, which was basically the motoring equivalent of how the Umbrella Corporation created the Tyrant, or Nemesis. Basically taking the standard CLK and giving it some bulking agent to turn it into a monster. But there were some epic cars in GT1. I mean, just look at this list. There was the Panos GTR1, the Jaguar XJ220, the McLaren F1 GTR, the Lotus Elise, the Lamborghini Diablo 132, and the Lister Storm, to name a few. But back to the costs. What happened was that basically Mercedes, like Porsche, had taken the piss with homologation. McLaren then had to spend loads and loads of money, like some of the other manufacturers, to get the cars back up to scratch, which then meant that the grid started to fill with what were, for want of a better phrase, homologation specials. McLaren couldn't justify the costs anymore, so pulled out. BMW had pulled out the previous year. Then Mercedes went and locked out the entire 1998 season. The money being spent basically brought the cars to be on par with prototypes, and while cars like the McLaren F1 and the Ferrari F40 were race versions of the road cars, the Germans and the Japanese were building race cars with just enough road-going versions to satisfy that checkbox in the rulebook. So as you can imagine, there needs to be a restructure in the tiering system of the series. GT2 became the new FIA GT1 and the NGT class became GT2. The outgoing GT1 then evolved into what we know and love now as the ACO's LMP1, but there was still a dominant car. And it wasn't Porsche for once, it was the Maserati MC12, which won either the teams or the drivers' championship every year between 2006 and 2010. But still in this new formatted GT1, GT2 category, the idea was that the manufacturers built cars based on regulations set out by the SRO or the FIA, and then they would develop those cars over the course of the season. So imagine Formula 1, but with tin tops. But, you know, there is still the issues of costs, which particularly hit the customer teams. There was no way they could be a customer team and develop those cars to anywhere near the lengths that Porsche, McLaren, Mercedes, or whoever it was could. There were, however, several one-make series around the world that they wanted to make things more cost-effective for, because running in the Ferrari Challenge meant you were only working in that one series. You couldn't race it anywhere else. They wanted to make it so that that same car could just drop into another series, a bit like how Group A touring car rules were in the 80s. You could run in Britain, you could run in the World Championship, you could run in Australia, probably could have run in Germany as well. So the SRO went back to the drawing board to try and figure out a way to get these one-make series able to drop into other races around the world, and decided to make a category below GT1 and also below GT2 for these cars so that privateers could race on the cheap. Cheap, at least compared to the other two categories at least. They had GT1, they had GT2, so the next logical step below that, GT3. They also added some other bits and pieces to the rulebook as well. Costs were tightly regulated by the authorities by balancing the performance of each car to stop manufacturers spending millions on developing a rear wing for, a tenth of a second or so. The idea was to make the manufacturers go, why spend this much money on aero when it's getting nerfed anyway, and making other manufacturers go, oh, it's okay that we don't have as much power as Porsche or Mercedes or whoever, we'll get a leg up so we don't need to spend 10 million quid on getting another 5 horsepower. And remarkably, 8 manufacturers turned up for the first BOP test before the first ever European GT3 Championship. And then GT3 Championships opened up in the UK, Spain and Italy, with Germany, France and Brazil following not long after. By 2020, 52 cars have passed through homologation from brands such as, the more popular stuff like Aston Martin, Lamborghini, Mercedes, Ferrari, Nissan, Jaguar, and in the words of Chris Hay, there was even a f***ing Morgan. And while people like Bentley, Aston Martin and a couple of others have reduced or abandoned factory teams or factory support, there is still a massive amount of cars on the grid in the seemingly endless amount of GT3 championships around the world today. But why did it become so popular? Well, the first answer is costs. General running costs for a team to run 2 cars for the year is about $5 million. Compare that with the $145 million that you have to spend to meet the cost cap in Formula 1. And Formula 1 also has the absolutely absurd $200 million entrance fee. It costs you more to enter than it does to build the car and run it for a season. The second thing is the fairness of competition. Like I mentioned, the performance of each car is balanced to stop manufacturers spending their way to the top and the other manufacturers leaving because they can't justify spending loads of money to lose every week. Some cars will have an advantage at certain tracks because some cars are front engines, some are mid engines and some are rear engined, or wrong as I like to call them. But it's not like one manufacturer is constantly dominant. It's then on the teams to extract everything from the car and the drivers to show how quick they are rather than how much money was spent. And the third reason, and it's a reason that I don't think many people consider, is that it's advertising. If you're as old as me and you watched the BTCC at the height of the Super Touring years, you picked your allegiances based off what your dad drove. So for me, it was Ford. The cars, like they do in the BTCC, still look like their road-going counterparts, so you can easily support your favourite brands. Again, whether that's Aston Martin, I do like Aston Martins, Merc, Lambo, Ferrari. I'm sure there is one Honda fan out there. The SLS AMG GT3 looks very much like the road version. The same goes for the Huracan, the 488 and the V8 Vantage. All great looking cars, and it means that the grid is full of attractive and awesome supercar shapes. They're not touring cars, they're grand touring cars. And reason number 4 is that they can be driven by pros and amateurs. And people moan about traction control and ABS and things on these cars, but it means that the gentleman racer and the pro driver are able to compete on the same track at the same time, safely. And for one last monster statistic, as of 2021 there are 24 active GT3 championships around the world, and that includes IMSA and other series that use multiclass. And now the ACO is looking at merging GTE into GT3 as some sort of GT3 Pro category because of the way that GTE is now dying out. So then, a quick look at how GT3 came to be and how it evolved out of the death of GT1 and became the world's most popular racing category. If you've learned something new here today, then be sure to give the video one of these, and if you want more stuff like this, if you want to know when I'm going live for that live stream on Sunday night, or anything else I do here on this channel, like the Can F1 handle stuff, Motorsport Explained and all that good stuff. I need to do some more Motorsport Explained stuff actually. Obviously, subscribe and get the bell on so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks to the good folk of Patreon that continue to support the channel at a more personal level. And if you do want to give me a monthly tip, you can do so by following the link in the description box underneath this video, where there'll also be a link to the chilled out Discord chat, as well as some vague directions to my social media. And as a final point, massive thank you to everybody that's watched my content over sort of November and December. Views are up, subscribers are going up, and like I've said, once we get to 100k, I'll do the bloody Moreno video. So that's it for me. I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a cracking day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye.